This impeachment talk did not begin here at Oxford. Rather, peculiarly, the conversation regarding the impeachment of Donald J. Trump began the very first morning after he defeated Hillary Clinton in a stunning upset back in 2016.
It's become apparent to me over these last few years that the left has no idea that the world did not begin in 1776. 3 years of traveling the country and facing off with hysterical liberals, and that is my scientific conclusion, that they haven't the slightest idea that anything exists or that anything ever existed outside of the United States of America. You will all recall when the left, which in my opinion has morphed into a doomsday cult, feverishly and inaccurately predicting that everything President Trump says or does will end America. But you all recall when they once again prophesized our doom when Iranian terrorist Soleimani was slain in a military operation. You remember that, right? This is the beginning of World War III, their headlines read. They promised us we were going to head straight into World War III. It was a remarkable day because it was the day that we watched Democrats and liberals, the ones who have been shrieking about sexism, misogyny, and the need for more feminism, turn into passionate defenders of the state of Iran, the country whose constitution quite literally states that a woman's life is worth half that of a man's, a country where women are punished by law for up to 10 years in prison if they are caught not wearing a veil, suddenly became the apple of the left's eye. Of course, the war never happened.
And so we are forced to ask ourselves here today, how is it possible that calls for his impeachment began before he even officially assumed office? First, and I recall this one quite affectionately, came the rabid charges of Russian collusion, the conspiracy theory that the Trump campaign had colluded with Vladimir Putin to influence the election results. Sadly, after 2 years of unfettered media propaganda, Democrats' hero and special counsel lead prosecutor Robert Mueller ended the probe, concluding that there was absolutely no proof, zero, that any member of the Trump campaign colluded with Russia.
But in the midst of their delirium, a tweet went out from resident anti-American Colin Kaepernick. And the tweet read, exactly, and I quote, "There is nothing new about American attacks against black and brown people for the expansion of American imperialism. America has always sanctioned and besieged black and brown bodies. American militarism is the weapon wielded by American imperialists to enforce its policing and plundering of the non-white world," end quote. Fascinating. A rant about black and brown bodies being imperialized, a word that I must assume Colin either doesn't know the definition or the history of, used in defense of Iran. And so, of course, you know me on Twitter. I felt it necessary to mention to Colin, gently, of course, you know me, I'm very nice on Twitter, to mention to Colin that that particular country of brown and black bodies used to be known as Persia. And rather unfortunately for his implied thesis regarding their perpetual victimhood at the hands of white people, Persia used to be an empire, quite literally an imperial dynasty for 200 years, almost as long as America has been alive. It was once the most powerful state in the world, imperializing regions from Egypt to India, regions of, you guessed it, black and brown people.
Embarrassed, defeated, the Democrats quickly jumped to their next claim, obstruction of justice, the rather illogical charge that the incumbent president went to great lengths to obstruct the special counsel from discovering his innocence. The claim defied common sense, which is why, unsurprisingly, in March of 2019, the evidence of obstruction was officially deemed insufficient, and the corresponding charges were formally dropped. Running parallel to all of this foolishness was the extraordinary charge of campaign finance violation, a time when an unlikely Democrat hero emerged, porn star Stormy Daniels. Impeachment, the media obsessively claimed, was a plausibility because hush money was received by Ms. Daniels from the Trump campaign. The Democrats became certain that this was the story that would sink the presidency. So certain, in fact, that they transformed Miss Daniels' lawyer, Michael Avenatti, into an overnight celebrity. Propped up as the long-awaited kryptonite to the MAGA superhero, there were public calls for Mr. Avenatti to run against Trump in 2020. More sadness, because that story collapsed too. And if you need an update, Ms. Daniels was ordered by a judge to pay Trump nearly $300,000 in legal fees. And the hush money lawsuit against the president was dismissed entirely by a judge back in March. Oh, and what of Mr. Michael Avenatti, the man once glorified by Democrats as a presidential contender? It grieves me to report that he has now been accused of financial fraud himself, indicted for extortion, fraud, and identity theft by a host of clients, including Ms. Stormy Daniels herself.
And while I have to say that I was not shocked to learn that Colin Kaepernick has evidently never picked up a historical textbook, I will say that I was shocked that he hadn't at the very least seen the movie 300. A little movie where the black and brown bodies are looking to imperialize the white bodies in Greece. Maybe he thought it was all made up and fiction. Or maybe Colin Kaepernick isn't earning millions to tell the truth. Maybe he's being paid millions to convince black and brown bodies that they are oppressed, to keep them angry and confused and uneducated. Which could explain why, on Thanksgiving Day of last year, Colin tweeted, I quote, "The U.S. government has stolen over 1.5 billion acres of land from indigenous people. Thank you to my indigenous family. I am with you now and always," end quote. Holiday tweets are his favorite, by the way. On the 4th of July, he tweeted, what to the American slave is your 4th of July? Co-opting, by the way, a Frederick Douglass quote and stripping it of its original context to convey the idea that blacks owe this country not a moment of celebration. I'm talking about Colin because the picture that he is painting is clear, and I'm using him as an example because it is so in line with the overall opinion that we are seeing come from the left today, an opinion that America is a horribly racist country whose guilt cannot be untethered from her period of slavery. Which is interesting because if slavery is an everlasting sin from white men, why was Colin so clearly able to forgive that sin from American indigenous people, his quote-unquote family?
Which brings us to Ukraine, because only in the fervent madness and desperation of radicalized leftism could a man be accused of colluding with both Russia and Ukraine. Despite Ukrainian President Zelensky outright denying that any quid pro quo existed between his government and Trump, and despite the disastrous hearing yesterday before the House, which revealed that none of the alleged whistleblowers had any firsthand knowledge of the call between the two leaders, Democrats will continue to push this narrative to its natural conclusion until it collapses, like all of the other false narratives, under the weight of its own deception. Ladies and gentlemen, need I remind you that a president can only be impeached for committing a high crime or a misdemeanor, a crime like former Democrat President Bill Clinton committed when he lied under oath about sexual relations that he had with an 18-year-old intern in the White House.
It's a wonder that Colin never mentioned that in Ghana today, his beloved country of emotional reprieve from the horror of America, 20,000 children live in slavery to support the fishing industry along Lake Volta. In fact, it was leftist network CNN that covered the story last year when a boy was rescued from slavery and had explained to them that while in captivity, he was made to work tirelessly, and that if the famished children were caught trying to eat the fish, they were beaten so senselessly that they wished that they had never been born. Why didn't Colin mention any of this? Why haven't any of the alleged courageous leaders on black issues of oppression mentioned any of this? I know, because they aren't leaders at all. They're all extortionists.
We too entertained, can't separate the real from the fake. Women self-esteem determined by their body and face. Men not looking for love, they just been planting they seed. And when the seeds start to grow is when they back up and leave. Yeah, just let me die in silence. I cannot say the word and I cannot stop the violence. It's too much entertainment and they gone. All